group of islands claimed by both nations. Well, the Japanese Prime Minister who presided over the Fukushima disaster in March 2011, Naoto has been visiting Australia this week on a speaking tour as a guest of peak environment and public health organisations. We spoke earlier about the national tragedy that has profoundly affected his view of nuclear energy.
Prior to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, I had believed that if sufficient caution was put in place regarding safety, that we should continue to use nuclear power. However, in the case of the Fukushima disaster, after this, we were faced with being right on the verge of having to evacuate 50 million people. Experiencing this moment made me completely understand that nuclear power should be stopped not only for Japan but for the entire humanity. And for this reason, I changed my position on nuclear energy 180%.
How much, though, depended on the fact that the maintenance at the plant, the emergency procedures were very lacking, and there was a lot of criticism around that at the time?
Of course, in the case of the disaster at Fukushima, the direct cause of the accident was the earthquake and tsunami, and so this is different to nuclear accidents which have happened in the past, such as those at 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. But each of these accidents has in common the factor of human error. In the case of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the reactor 1 was constructed by the American company GE, and for this reason, the basic rules and regulations for the operation were not specific to the Fukushima disaster, but rather following the international standards. For this reason, of course, while there were certain aspects of the disaster which were specific to what happened in Fukushima, such components of human error and other factors could mean that such an accident could happen at any nuclear power plant anywhere in the world.
But there are many countries in Europe and in other parts where, in fact, nuclear energy is run quite safely.
I believe that it is impossible to construct nuclear power plants in a way that have absolutely no risk of any kind of accident occurring. So what we need to prepare for is not thinking about whether it will happen, but think about when an accident does happen, what can we do to make sure the damage is minimized? In other words, how can nuclear power plants be built in places which will not have significant damage? In the case of Japan, of course, which has such a high population density, there is almost nowhere, therefore, that nuclear power plants are suitable to be built. And worldwide as well, also considering the construction of nuclear power plants near cities or near places where people are living, meaning that mass evacuation would have to be considered in the case of a disaster, means that there is almost nowhere around the world where it would be indeed safe to build a nuclear reactor.
A report has just come out in Australia about the renewable energy targets and potentially scaling those back. Would you have any comment about Australia going down that path of reducing those targets?
In Japan, after the March 11 disaster, we introduced a feed-in tariff system, and as a result of this, we have seen significant rapid increases in renewable energy, particularly in solar. And we are now evaluating that if we are able to maintain this momentum, within the next 10 years it will be possible to actually be generating as much electricity through renewable sources as was being generated through nuclear power prior to the disaster. I believe that Australia has significantly more potential for renewable energy than our country Japan.
I'm really interested to know if you have any discussions with China. Of course, there's such a huge demand for energy there. What are your thoughts about how they are approaching this very, very big need? In the case of China, immediately after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, China ceased its plans for constructing new nuclear power plants in the inland areas of the country because of being very prone to earthquakes in those areas. However, due to rapid economic development and growth, the plans are still in place to construct new nuclear power plants in the coastal areas of China. At the moment, there are around 20 nuclear power reactors operating in the country. However, there are some predictions saying now that within the next 5 or 10 years, this number could double or triple, and this is a matter of great concern. How serious does the threat remain around that Fukushima region to the people that are still living there?
Even today at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, there is radioactively contaminated water being leaked regularly outside the plant, and for this reason the accident is still not over.
In many agricultural areas in the surrounding region around Fukushima, the levels of radiation are very high. This means that agriculture and crops which are grown there, even if they can be grown, they cannot be eaten, for example.
I'm fascinated to try and understand how this whole experience has personally affected you.
The first point was that my fundamental understanding or way of thinking about nuclear technology has completely changed. And to put this in a word, the plutonium which is created as a process from the nuclear power plants, I really have to question whether humanity can indeed coexist with plutonium, with this material.
And that was the former Prime Minister of Japan, Naoto, who's been on a speaking tour, really campaigning quite strongly against nuclear energy, as you heard. Now, former pro wrestler turned